The stove is truly hot in St. Louis as the Cardinals make their second acquisition in as many days. What's going on, everyone, and welcome into this edition of B-Schaeff Daily. Brenden Schaeffer with you. It is Friday, February 7th, 2025. Look, I won't try to pretend it's not dumpster diving, but if you're making the decision to dive into the dumpster, it's still nice to eat every once in a while, and that's what the Cardinals are doing as they have added a veteran reliever on a minor league contract with an invite to spring training. It is former Tampa Bay Rays reliever, former Royals reliever more recently, Nick Anderson, who will be going into his age 35 season, but is signed with the Cardinals on a deal worth $1.1 million if Nick Anderson makes the opening day roster with the Cardinals. This deal offers St. Louis some flexibility that I think makes it a pretty sensible signing, especially considering the challenges that the Cardinals are enduring this offseason, which are, granted, self-inflicted in many regards. It's the team itself that decided to slash the payroll, and it's the team that decided it needed to trade Nolan Arenado to do that, and knowing that it could be like trying to thread the camel through the eye of the needle, given that Arenado has the no-trade clause that he has invoked to block the one deal the Cardinals thought they had done to accomplish their offseason goal. So when I say this is a deal that makes sense for where they are, I'm still acknowledging all of that, well, where they are, they didn't have to be, but this is where they are, and I'm going to try to live in that reality as we discuss the upcoming season for the Cardinals, which to some Cardinals fans might be one that's going to be a complete bust. To others, you kind of see the light on the way the Cardinals are framing this thing and believe that some of the young talent can emerge, some of the veterans that are still around can help, shepherd everybody together, and maybe they come up with something. Now, Nick Anderson, certainly more on the veteran side of things, but to me, there are merits for this type of acquisition, so we'll talk about what those are, but I just want to real quick say thank you guys for listening as we are gearing up just a few days away from me driving down to Jupiter, Florida to cover all things Cardinals during spring training. Love the days leading up to the games of Grapefruit League play. Those are, to me, and I've always said, if you're going to make the trip down for spring, don't necessarily look at the schedule of when the Grapefruit League games are. Sure, it's great to catch a game. Go before that. In my opinion, go before the games start and have the access to the facilities in Jupiter. I think that's the time that you really get the most bang for your buck as a fan. I think it's pretty well free for fans to maneuver throughout the facilities during the designated practice times. If I'm not mistaken, I could be wrong about this, but see a lot of fans out there getting up close and personal looks. So that's what I'm going to try to provide to those fans that do not make it down for spring training in Jupiter. Via the videos on YouTube, we will bring the sights and sounds back, so I will be able to kind of clip together some of what's going on each day at Cardinals camp. The podcast will be hot and heavy, plenty more to come as well in written format, so just make sure you stay tuned to everything that I'm doing. And if you'd like to support my endeavors, if you'd like to support the channel, you can do so in a couple of ways. One, you can just check out the YouTube membership in the video description below. The link is right there if you'd like to become part of the B-Schaeff Daily Lounge. We still do have the Discord that I'll start talking more and more about as we get into the swing of things for baseball. Hopefully lots of fun baseball and Cardinals conversation in the Discord throughout the season. The link is right there below. Join the Discord. Should be a great time throughout the 2025 campaign. And, of course, if you have a business, if you're a business owner and you'd like to partner with B-Schaeff Daily for spring training coverage, well, you can DM me at bschaefer12 on Twitter or email bschaefer12@outlook.com. Let's talk about Nick Anderson. This is the type of signing that I said, and I said it on Twitter, I think it makes sense for the Cardinals for where they're at. Now, what exactly do I mean by that? Well, they're struggling to get rid of the contract of Nolan Arenado because he blocked the deal to Houston. It's a deal they thought they were going to have done a number of weeks ago and would have probably given them a little bit more room for budgeting in the types of relievers that maybe wouldn't have to sign a non-roster invite minor league free agent deal like Nick Anderson. But Nick Anderson had a 4.04 ERA last season with the Kansas City Royals, and I don't believe he was healthy for the full scope of the season. I'd have to go back through the game logs to exactly get a glimpse for when he might have been injured. Pitch April, May, June, July, and then he did finish the season on the injured list. So that's part of the reason, too. There's a question of his health, which I think is why it's a deal that makes sense for the Cardinals, but also makes sense for where Nick Anderson is, because it's probably the only type of deal that he was going to get after coming off of an injury to end last season. But according to Ari Alexander, who tweeted out earlier this afternoon, and he is a Mizzou alum for one, but also a reporter down in Houston, reported that the deal is worth $1.1 million if Anderson makes the opening day roster. But Anderson has a clause in the contract that allows another team to add him to their opening day roster if the Cardinals don't elect to include him on the team. The reason this happens is, as I mentioned, from Anderson's standpoint, he's coming off of an injury, so you kind of have to take what you could get, right? Cardinals are an opportunity where I think he looks at the bullpen mix and says, not a lot of veterans there, certainly could use a right-hander, right? Could he be this year's Andrew Kittredge, just coming a heck of a lot cheaper for the Cardinals if he proves his health in spring and is able to make the team? Like, that would be ideal, I think, for the Cardinals. Now, granted, would he be above Ryan Fernandez in the bullpen pecking order? Maybe, maybe not. That would all remain to be seen. But I think it makes sense for the Cardinals to take a flyer on a guy like this, and it's no risk. Like, a lot of times when these types of deals get announced, I see people on social media get upset, and the jokes, they really do write themselves, because you could say, well, Anderson's going to be 35 years old. That's just what, the Cardinals delving into the youth movement really need, and he doesn't turn 35 till July. So, I mean, I guess technically this is still his age 34 season, because I think they base that off of your age on July 1st. I don't know how they do it for me, because that's my actual birthday, but I guess I'll never have to worry about that because I'm not a big league player. But yes, I can understand how Cardinals fans would see what the team said going into the offseason of really needing to give the young guys a chance, and then seeing, as they're finally, months later, making a couple of moves to supplement the periphery of the roster, and it's a 28 going on 29-year-old utility man who's seemingly doesn't have a lot of upside, but has played, 10 big league at-bats, and it's 34 going on 35-year-old Nick Anderson, who ended the last season injured and doesn't exactly scream fountain of youth. So you can see how there would be some contradictory thoughts going on there from the Cardinals' perspective. But the way that I view, and look, I think this is the way the Cardinals view it. You don't have to like it. You don't have to agree with it. I'm welcome to whatever your thoughts might be in the comments. I happen to be able to see the argument that they're making while also acknowledging that I don't know where it's really going to get the Cardinals. Like, I'm not sure what they're going to get out of this. There's a world in which they thread this needle and they do move Arenado, which allows Gorman to play third base. It allows Donovan to play second. They've got Mason at short. They're going to put Walker in right every day. They're going to split the catching duties between two sub-25-year-old catchers. Pages is going to catch half the time, Herrera the other half. Herrera's going to DH a bunch, so he still gets to be in the lineup more often than not. Burleson's going to play some first when Contreras doesn't. He's going to play a little bit of outfield. He's going to DH the rest of the time, and everybody gets their opportunity to play, and maybe they all take a step forward at the exact same time, and the Cardinals, they end up having a really good lineup. Maybe that's what happens. I think it's what the Cardinals are hoping to see. They bring in Brant Brown to be the hitting coach to try to inject some life into this lineup, take a little bit of a different approach to hitting, whatever that might entail. We'll get to Jupiter and hopefully find out more about exactly what that looks like from a nuts and bolts perspective. And that's like the youth movement that I see. Does the youth movement have to include all 9 and really 10 positions in the lineup being guys who are 25 or younger? I don't think it does, because I think if you did that, you might not be capitalizing on some elements of things that the Cardinals have at their disposal. Like if you told Wilson Contreras, yep, we're not playing you, so we're just going to trade you, and I don't care what you want, tell us the teams that you'll go to. And maybe he'd say, I wouldn't go anywhere. And the Cardinals would, try to strong-arm him into a trade. I don't know how people thought that was going to happen, but let's say they did it. What would they have got for Wilson Contreras? You would see the desperation of a Cardinals team trying to trim salary in the same way that it's happening with Arenado. The deal with Houston, I don't think the Cardinals were going to get a lot in the way of prospects for Arenado. They were going to get salary relief. And if you wanted to get that same thing from a Sonny Gray trade and a Wilson Contreras trade, maybe you could have done that. But as far as I see it, from the Cardinals fan perspective, that there's anger or any sort of conception that the Cardinals are making a mistake by not trading those veteran players because those are spots that could be occupied by young guys. I don't know that they necessarily have the crop of young guys that we haven't seen yet who are major league ready and about to emerge. It's okay to have some veterans on a team that's still looking toward a youth movement. And from the Cardinals' perspective, it's especially okay to do that because they do want to win games this year. They'd rather win than lose. They're just not going out of their way to spend enough to make it more likely that they're going to win, or spend in the caliber of free agent that makes their team on paper better enough that makes it more likely that they're going to win. They could win this year, but if they do, it's going to be in spite of the fact that they didn't maximize their offseason in trying to improve the major league roster. Nobody would argue that they've spent this winter maximizing their leverage in improving the major league roster. They've done almost the opposite of that by trying to trade away Arenado. But that doesn't mean it can't work out. We've seen examples of that in past seasons, but I'm also understanding of fan base frustration from a really we're supposed to lean on, well, maybe it works out. It's not impossible that it would work out. I'm not saying it's the most exciting plan in the world. It's actually pretty bland as far as game plans go. But I do think it's where they're living. They're living in the land of ownership, and the front office are operating with the goal of slashing payroll to benefit the ownership group that doesn't think it's going to get the revenues this year to be able to afford the higher payroll. Whether that's actually just an excuse to make more profit, we'll never know. We don't get to see the books, but that is exactly what they're looking to do from a front office perspective. What does that mean for the on-field product? Well, it means, for better or worse, you're leaning on some of the guys that you already have. Some of those guys are young. It makes more sense from a marketing perspective to lean in on those players and say, hey, Cardinals fans, come see these guys at the ballpark because they're young and they're fun and you haven't seen the best of what they're capable of doing. You probably don't base your marketing around Miles Mikolas being in the rotation for another year after he just didn't measure up last season. He's still under contract, though. They've got him, and it doesn't really benefit the team to dump him unless you really thought you had enough in the way of young pitchers to be able to fill 6-7 innings at a time. Mikolas is probably going to throw 5-6+ innings most of the time that he goes out there. He was still a pretty decent option for quality starts last season, even though his overall numbers were bad. But I can understand where they would say it's not as simple as, well, we should pay Miles Mikolas to go away and put Gordon Graceffo directly into that rotation spot and see what he has. Because what if Gordon Graceffo doesn't have the ability to even get you through 3-4 innings? Well, then you're back to like 2022, or excuse me, I should say 2023, where you get to a certain point in the season where you realized all is lost, but you don't feel comfortable bringing up prospects who might not be ready to just eat it for a while, because what does that do to their development if they're not quite to that stage in their careers yet? And you end up just bringing in a bunch of veterans at the end to mop up innings. That's really the way the 2023 season concluded. I think the Cardinals are trying to toe a line. It's like the first year they saw the bottom drop out. What did they do in free agency after that? They said, let's get Lynn and Gibson to make sure the bottom doesn't drop out. 2024 happened. The bottom didn't drop out. But on the periphery, there's this thing going on where they don't really want to spend as much money because they're worried about the revenues. So heading into 2025, what are they going to do? Well, they're going to lean on younger players more so than they would have been willing to do back in 2023 when they just decided to go with the Casey Lawrence group and the Jacob Barnes and Andrew Suarez contingent to get you through some innings. They're not really comfortable doing it to that full extent, however, when it comes to literally cut Miles Mikolas and say, Gordon Graceffo, you're in the rotation to begin 2025. There could be some merit to doing that, to basically just having a rotation. Like, you would trade Sonny, you would trade Wilson, you would cut Mikolas, you would cut or trade Matz, save any penny that you can. There's merit to that from a front office perspective, an ownership perspective, if they're trying to save money. But I think what happens is the Cardinals end up losing 95 or 100 games. Like, I don't think anybody's looking at the current roster and saying the Cardinals are going to lose 95 or 100 games. In a world where your rotation, I mean, I could try to paint the best possible rotation that I could, where you truly just go with no veterans. And I think that would look like Palante. I mean, Fetty probably gets traded. Again, if you're trading veterans and you're truly just letting guys play, Palante, McGreevy, Graceffo, Liberatore, and Zach Thompson. Like, that could be your 5-man rotation. Or maybe it's Sem Robertson as one of those spots. Or maybe, and look, that's also dependent on those guys all staying healthy. If you were to look at the game logs in Memphis, Tennessee at the end of last season with a AAA team, there's a lot of guys that were starting games that are none of the names I just mentioned because several guys were injured. So, like, your organizational depth has to be able to withstand you cutting all of these arms that people seem to think that they should, get rid of Mikolas, get rid of Matz, all this, and then bring up the young guys for the opportunity. What's likely going to happen is some of those veterans are going to get hurt because pitchers tend to get hurt. It's not a natural thing to throw a baseball overhand, not at the speeds they throw it. And so guys are going to end up getting hurt throughout the season. I think this will be a year where you do see a lot more of willingness from the Cardinals to lean on that minor league depth. When a Gordon Graceffo ends up, having an opportunity in the big league rotation, it probably is one that sticks for a little longer, especially if the Cardinals are losing games and they're like, all right, this is just a development thing. Let's see whether Gordon Graceffo can sink or swim as a big league starter. And maybe you find out that you've got a couple more Palantes in that group of people that you had mentally gone, I don't think he's really a top prospect at this point. I'm not sure what it would look like if he had to pitch 30 games in a big league season as a starter. We're not really comfortable with it. I think the Cardinals are going to allow for a little bit more creativity in that regard than they have in past seasons, because you also kind of have this what do you have to lose mentality with some of those guys, where if you thought they were prospects at one time, but maybe the last couple of years they've underwhelmed or whatever the case has been, you're a little bit more willing to just say, going into a new regime, right? Like, let's kind of let Chaim Bloom have every opportunity to get a full look at some of these players. I think that's a fair thing, but I don't think it has to be at the expense entirely of allowing the veterans that you're already paying to fill some of those positions. Because as I look at it, I gave it out as far as the lineup is concerned. I really do think you've got plenty of room for the young guys to play. We'll continue to talk about it as we get into spring, but I would remind people to look back at last year. I was in spring training going, yep, I don't think Alec Burleson's making this team. They just signed Brandon Crawford. And then multiple people got hurt, and Burleson ended up being on the team, constantly in the lineup throughout the season, finishing as one of the team's more productive hitters and more prominent hitters with where they put him in the batting order. Those types of things happen just about every year. So I'm not going to look at the lineup on paper and say, oh my gosh, how are you going to find the playing time for everybody? I think it just kind of is going to work itself out. I'll tell you if I was wrong when we get to the end of March, but for right now, I do think that there's a lot of room to play with, and we're going to learn some things about some players. And unfortunately, some players might end up getting hurt, and that can kind of make the decisions all the more easier. But in a year where the Cardinals are prioritizing development, there's a chance that Thomas Saggese starts the team in AAA. There's also a chance that he's your everyday third or second baseman to begin the season, depending on what the health happens to be and what maybe some of the trades happen to be over the next 6 weeks or so. There's a lot of different directions that this could go, to where I think by the end of the season, Thomas Saggese will play a very notable part on the Cardinals. The way that I look at it today is, yeah, on paper, he's probably in Memphis because you'd rather have a Michael Hellman or a Jose Fermin just rotting on the bench, riding pine, rather than having somebody like Saggese, who you have high hopes for in the future, in that role at the big league level. That's why you have utility guys. That's why you have bench guys. And I think some of the guys that are being brought in, it's not worth getting too upset about. Having Michael Hellman come into camp might be an interesting piece to throw on the end of your bench, versus Saggese just really doesn't fit that category. I think when Saggese comes up, it's because the Cardinals see the opportunity for him to play just about every day in the lineup. So that's all the way that it breaks down to me from a position player standpoint. From a pitching standpoint, yes, the rotation is got a lot of veterans in it. And so you do kind of scratch your head because, well, we've heard so much about this youth movement. I do think McGreevy ends up in the opening day rotation. I don't know how it happens, but if he's healthy, I think he's in it. Because Steven Matz could get hurt, Michaels could get hurt, Sonny could get hurt, Fetty could get hurt, and I guess in theory Palante could get hurt, but you really hope that doesn't happen. You don't want any of those guys to get hurt. But every year I've covered the Cardinals in spring training, somebody has gotten hurt from their rotation and has not been available for opening day. It's just been a fact of life. So if that happens, it's very easy to see how McGreevy would slide in. If you start trading away and just dumping guys and getting nothing in return, like Michaelis and Matz, you could do that. But then what happens if Palante gets hurt and you've already just willfully given away some of your arms? Well, you probably win less games, because even though you're going to get a sooner look at some of the AAA guys that would have otherwise been stashed away, what happens if 50% of those guys aren't up to the task and you have to work your way down the depth chart to the next guy? And what happens if, when you're ready to do that, two guys from AAA are injured, which was basically the case for the majority of the late summer last year? Guys like Adam Kloffenstein are even in the rotation. They're not even in the organization anymore because he got injured. I think he blew out his shoulder, and that was that. Like, these are some of the things that are liable to happen throughout a baseball season. And so when I look at a roster on paper in February, I try now to not go too crazy with it, because last year I feel like I was in that mode where I was like, I don't really know how this is all going to fit together, guys. And then I saw very quickly how it's like, oh yeah, this isn't even really that much of a problem. And so it's not sexy to hear. It's not, when Mozeliak says, these things kind of work themselves out, you just want to roll your eyes because it's Mozeliak saying it. And I know that's how people feel about the guy. But I'm like, he might have a point to it, or he might not. Time's going to tell. But I'm also kind of willing to go, okay, the youth movement, that's the position players. Commit to it. Don't just say it and then have, more veterans that they sign for the bench throughout the season, or I should say throughout the spring, that kind of fit the Brandon Crawford mold, and then you start giving those guys playing time. Don't do that, but I don't think they're going to this time around. The rotation, I kind of explained how I think McGreevy is the one AAA pitcher that I think is legit ready day one, and I honestly think through one way or another, he's going to end up in the rotation come opening day. Behind him, it could be the Graceffos. It could be the other guys. Quinn Matthews is worthy of discussion in this tier. If he has a great spring, he's going to be knocking on the door pretty quickly. If he doesn't, it's going to be some seasoning time in AAA, and that's okay too. Maybe he doesn't make it up until July when they have an opportunity in the rotation due to injury, or by then, if it's an underperforming Steven Matz or Michaelis that's in the rotation, but they're just not pitching well, and there's somebody like Quinn knocking on the door, then you can talk about the DFA route, potentially, for sure. But I think going into the season, you don't want to count your chickens on, well, yeah, we just know that we want to get a look at these young guys. And if you got these veterans around that you're already paying, I don't have a problem with keeping them around and seeing if they might be able to reinvent their careers relative to their performances the last couple of years. And I feel like that is applicable. I know this is a long-winded way to get back to Nick Anderson, but I think it's applicable to Nick Anderson. He's coming off injuries. He's had injuries the last several years, back issues, forearm issues, etc. It may be that Anderson's not able to contribute because he's not healthy. If so, the Cardinals spent nothing to get him. If they decide to put him on the roster, it's $1.1 million. That's not crazy for the role that he could potentially fill if it works out and he ends up being healthy. I mentioned 4.04 ERA last year. 2023 with Atlanta, also spent some time injured that year, 3.06 ERA, missed the entire 2022 season, but 35 innings in each of his last 2 years for a combined 3.5 ERA or so. That's not bad. And the Cardinals might end up getting that for a little bit more than $1 million this year if he's able to be healthy enough for the Cardinals to say, yep, we trust you to make the 26, to make the bullpen, and make the team. But the reason I think this signing, and honestly, I'd sign more guys exactly like him. I would add one or two more guys in this similar vein, non-roster invite to spring camp, where you don't have to have a 40-man spot for him right now today, but if he shows himself, you know you're going to be able to, okay, we have to cut somebody from the 40, but let spring training happen first so you can decide who is the appropriate person to cut from that roster before you put Nick Anderson on it. I think that's a way that makes a whole heck of a lot of sense for where the Cardinals are right now, and like I said, for where Nick Anderson is, it's probably the best that he could get. But when you look at this bullpen, as the Cardinals are coming into this season, that is an area that I don't think it's entirely necessary to prioritize a youth movement, because in the off chance that the offense is pretty good and the rotation is a little better than you thought it was going to be with veterans and even the younger guys kind of holding their own. Like, I don't think the rotation is bad. I just think it lacks upside, and in the notion of like a Michaelis and Matz, it might just lack quality. So I'm not saying it's going to be a top unit. It's probably not even a top 20 unit. But if it's like the 22nd unit in MLB and your offense full of young players decides to ascend all at once and it's a top 12 unit in MLB, which I don't think I would project today, but if you told me it happened, I wouldn't be downright stunned as a result of it. If those things took place, it would be nice to at least do your due diligence to have a bullpen that doesn't completely implode. Because there's a world where the Cardinals do these other things particularly like decently, acceptably, passably, but then their bullpen just absolutely doesn't have it because they don't have enough credible, reliable experience within it. Now, I think with a Nick Anderson, if he ends up being healthy, you've got that one additional righty that you don't have to say is kind of a complete unknown. Like the guys like Chris Roycroft, Kyle Leahy, Ryan Ludus, those guys are all going to be mixing in and out of the bullpen and between here and Memphis throughout the season. But, like, what are you going to get? Are any of those guys going to truly have a Ryan Fernandez-level season where they rise above their station and contribute and turn into a reliable dude? Maybe they do. Let's say it's Roycroft. I know they liked him a lot last year. I know the stuff plays. Let's say he slots in there, but you're able to say he's rotating with the likes of Leahy, with the likes of Ludus at all, and Nick Anderson slides in as a seventh-inning type of guy as well. Well, now you've got Anderson, Fernandez, Roycroft as the righties leading into the late innings. Jojo Romero, probably your other setup man from the left side. Helsley's your closer, at least to begin the year, and if they stay competitive, it'll be an interesting July to see whether he's on the trade block or not. And then maybe Matthew Liberatore slides back into a lefty relief role because he looked pretty credible in it last year when they gave him some run. And now it's like, okay, you've got 6 bullpen guys that you think are pretty decent. Maybe John King is back out there. Arbitration eligible, they decided to keep him. It's another lefty that you could potentially look at. Suddenly the bullpen starts to come together a little bit more if a Nick Anderson can be healthy and give you a sub-4 ERA in the 6th, 7th inning role. It's not glamorous, but it's something that I think the Cardinals, if they do have designs on just being in the middle, trying to make 500 and then see if maybe you don't get lucky and get a little bit above that, then yeah, I don't really have any problem with Nick Anderson, and I think the Cardinals should honestly find 2 more just like him, where you just throw numbers at the problem. You throw quantity over quality when it comes to bullpen, and instead of spending $8 million on a guy, or like last year, Keenan Middleton, great example, spent like $5 or $6 million on him, didn't get an inning out of Keenan Middleton. But if you sign 3 Nick Andersons and say, hey, if you're healthy and make the team, $1 million for you, and one of them does, then I think that's a value proposition that actually pans out in the Cardinals' favor. So although there's the notion that the Cardinals aren't going to be competitive enough to bother with signing or spending any money on veteran relievers. I still maintain, and I get it, that they're not trying to tank this season. They're trying to give themselves the best possible chance to compete under some guidelines that are going to make it very, very difficult to do so. And it is. It's threading a needle, but we'll see if they're able to get it done. And if they're not, well, expectations were low anyway. So I think that's probably where they come down on the conversation. Where do you come down on it when it comes to Nick Anderson, new Cardinals reliever? As long as he gets through spring healthy, I think he's going to end up being a pretty good option for another righty out of that bullpen. Let me know your thoughts on the move. And I know the Arenado stuff has definitely continued to heat up. I feel like I've done so many podcasts about Arenado this winter that even though there's a John Denton report out and there's some new conversations with the Red Sox and maybe the Dodgers and the Yankees, I feel like that's just one of those things that when it comes to a head, it comes to a head. If I've got nothing else to talk about tomorrow, maybe I dive into it a little bit. Maybe the trade's done by tomorrow. That would be nice. I hope they don't do it on Super Bowl Sunday, and I damn sure hope they don't do it on Monday because I'm driving to Florida, and you won't really be hearing from me other than a quick video on my phone from a gas station in Chattanooga. Anyway, that'll do it for this edition of the show. Appreciate you guys for staying tuned to the podcast channel, to b-schaeff daily, to the YouTube page, and all that good stuff. Continue to do so. I'm going to continue to be throwing a lot of content your way over the next days and weeks. So thank you guys so much for supporting, and we'll talk to you next time on B-Schaeff Daily. Peace!